First up is Eric Brailsford, who came all the way down from New York City, but probably thought he went north. Sorry the weather did not cooperate. We do get warm here, though. He's with 596 acres, and this organization started mapping Brooklyn's public vacant land and working with communities to get access to that land in the summer of 2011. Since then, it's expanded to cover all 5 boroughs in New York City, and it has partnered with groups in Philadelphia, New Orleans, and Los Angeles to make similar maps in those cities. As a part of this effort, the 596 Acres team has written an open source platform and has dealt with sometimes abundant and sometimes lacking availability of urban land use data. So Eric himself is a freelance computer programmer and map maker based in Brooklyn, New York City. He contributes his technical and data knowledge to 596 Acres, which, as you know, maps vacant and publicly owned land in New York City. In the summer of 2014, 596 Acres launched Urban Reviewer, a map of urban renewal plans also centered on New York City. Other projects he's helped with include a database that helps community gardeners to keep track of the amount of food they grow, and a map of food worker organizations called Changing the Food Chain. Please welcome Eric Brailsford.
Hi, thanks. So, next slide, please. I'm going to talk about 596 Acres. You might have to click on the window first.
On what?
Okay, cool. So, I'm a freelance programmer and map maker. Sorry, this got cut off a little bit. Next slide, please. If you're on Twitter, this is how you can find me. It's a good way to ask me questions if you have them. If you can't find me after the session, next please. Okay, so 596 Acres, we call ourselves New York City's community land access advocates. And I'm going to break down exactly what we mean by that through the course of this presentation. If it's not clear by the end, please let me know. So a little bit of background. So there is vacant land in New York City, and it tends to look like this. I have a laser pointer, and I'm going to use it. So chain link fences and weeds and rubble and trash, kind of an ever-present presence in a lot of New York City's neighborhoods. What's surprising to most people who know there's vacant land in New York City, such as the people who live in neighborhoods with that land, is that a lot of it's actually owned by the city or other public agencies. This sign, hard to tell from looking at this sign, but this sign is actually the best indication that it's owned by the city. Mostly it's telling you, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, but in Spanish. But right here, you can actually see it's owned by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Cool. So, next please. We try to counter that using things like New York City's open data platform. If you were kind of new to open data or data about New York City or geospatial data, this is actually a difficult data set to use. It's called the Local Law 48 of 2011 report, rolls right off the tongue. It's actually a database of all of the city-owned land in New York City. Okay, next please. If you downloaded this, you might say, oh hey, I'll geocode the addresses and then I'll have a map of the city-owned land. There are some problems with that, such as just plain garbage addresses, but also addresses that don't have house numbers. Maybe not surprisingly, vacant lots don't always have mailing addresses. They don't always receive mail. So you might say, oh, next please. Oh, I'll use coordinates. That sounds like a useful column. Sometimes. And if you aren't used to using geospatial data, like I wasn't 5 or 6 years ago, what the hell are these numbers? These aren't latitude and longitude. Next please. And then finally, actually, if you're not used to using data in New York City, this column doesn't make any sense either, but this is the really useful one. This is the BBL number, borough, block, and lot number. This uniquely identifies every single parcel. Every single piece of land in New York City has some associated BBL, unless it was a DMAT street. Then we just make up numbers for them. Next, please. Open data without data literacy is just plain frustration, and we tried to overcome that a little bit with our project. Next, please. So we have this map. It's we made it in 2011, and it kind of looks like we made it in 2011. We're fixing the design right now. But the green points are city-owned vacant land, and the pink ones are places where we've helped people start projects. So these are pieces of land where people have gardens or meeting spaces or other things that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Next, please. Every single vacant lot on this map has its own webpage, right here. And you can find out lots of information about it, some of it useful. Next, please. And the most useful part is every single piece of land has contact information for the person in the city agency who has control over that land. It's actually the phone number for the desk for the person who controls land for that agency. This is part of the civic literacy that we've worked on. When you know a piece of land is city-owned, you don't necessarily know which agency owns it. We've talked to people who said, I knew it was city-owned, I sent a letter to the Department of Buildings, they never got back to me. Department of Buildings doesn't own land, and isn't going to answer your mail. Next, please. So we put all of this stuff online, but we think it's absolutely vital to take it offline and go into neighborhoods where people live. So we print out these posters. I actually have a stack of the posters here, so if you want one, come up later. But we print out these posters and we paste them to boards and other things we can salvage. And next, please. And we hang those on the vacant lots. So we go straight to where this information is going to be the most useful. So we have on the right, that's a map of Brooklyn. You can kind of, up close, you can see where all the public vacant land is. And on the left is this flowchart that I'm going to break down in a few seconds. But next, please. In the middle, right, online's not enough. With this kind of information, the people who find our websites aren't necessarily the people that need this information. So this is like analog and digital are both equally important for us. This might be hard to read, but basically for every lot, kind of like for every lot's page, we have the information. For every lot, we also sometimes handwrite the phone number and the owning agency and also the borough, block, and lot number. That's the language the city speaks, so we help other people speak that language. And it works pretty well. Next, please. So here's a flow chart that we created as part of our effort. It's kind of, so I've been talking about data literacy, I've been talking about civic literacy. This is kind of like community organizing literacy, if you want to talk about it that way. So it takes you from, hey, you found a vacant lot. You want to do something with it. Where do I start? And then down to the bottom, maybe you get a key. Maybe. It's sort of a board game, but not really. Next. On the right, we walk through how you would work with your community. Next. On the left, we talk about how you talk to local government about vacant land in your neighborhood. Next, please. A lot of them feel obvious when you look at it, like, hey, maybe you should have a meeting. Maybe the meetings should have concrete outcomes. But we write it all down, and it's proven to be pretty helpful. Next, please. This is the goal for most people. Get a license. Often when we're talking about a license, we're talking about temporary use license that says technically you can get kicked off at any time. That's kind of the best we've gotten with the city. Okay, so back to the map. Next again. This is kind of the standard email that we get from people who find our site. I'll walk through this a little bit. Next, please. So I already mentioned Local Law 48 report. That's a downloadable database on New York City's open data portal. Next again. There's also EGVIS, which is like integrated property inventory system or something like that. Next. But we merged those two and tried to figure out which parcels are vacant based on a couple of columns in both of those. They helpfully do not always line up. And also, a lot of property is mislabeled as vacant, so community gardens are marked as vacant. That's the city. So, also, for every single parcel, we use the digital resources we have to double check. So we use a system called Oasis NYC, which is kind of it's the land use database for the whole city, put online. It's really handy. But we use this aerial imagery to see if it's actually looking vacant. And next, please. We also use Street View. Next again. So we call this virtual ground truthing. I don't know if we coined that, but I like it. We also do real ground truthing when we're walking through neighborhoods, but this cleaned up the databases a whole lot. And actually, somebody, you asked me before the session, where did 596 acres, the name, come from? And I didn't include it in these slides, but when we originally looked at the city's database and we added up all the vacant land in Brooklyn alone, it said 596 acres. That turned out to be very wrong, but it kind of stuck as a name. So that's where it came from. It's actually more like 150 acres in Brooklyn. Citywide is close to 500. We also, so we don't just remove things that are vacant, are clearly being used for something. We also remove things like this, which happens a lot in New York City because parcels get chopped up in funny ways. Sometimes there are surveying errors. Sometimes there are just bizarre slivers that I don't know how you would start a project here unless you knew the people that lived in Lot 21. So we removed these, or kind of moved them to another bucket because they're pretty distracting when you're looking to actually start something in your neighborhood. We had people who would like walk the whole way around this block and they'd say, I don't see it. Where's this parcel? Next, please. So now that we have all that data, we have a system where you can put in your address and it shows you all the vacant lots near you, all those green points. Next, please. And each of those lots pages has an area where you can add notes. So people add notes about the next meeting that they're going to have. Next, please. And also they kind of vent their frustration at trying to talk to the city. This isn't just venting, but it's actually also kind of institutional knowledge for the neighbors of the vacant lot. They can look back through this and say, oh, they already tried this person, they already tried that person, who else should I try? Back to the last page. Up here we have two buttons. Both of these subscribe you to the lot. So when someone posts a new note, you find out about it in your email box. You basically subscribe to it. Once again. Imagine every parcel in your city has its own Facebook page. That's kind of what it is. It's like a newsfeed for vacant lots. I totally made the text too big there. Sorry. Next. So, outcomes of this. Next, please. Communities now have access to 32 sites on 50 parcels totaling about 7.8 acres. In New York City, that's a lot of room. Next. Those spaces might look like this, kind of a standard community garden in New York City. You have raised beds where you're maybe growing food or other kinds of plants. They have compost over here, and the picture is actually being taken back here from like a picnic table / meeting space. Next, please. And harder to see, but this lot has seen a number of uses. It's actually very large, and it's and in this case, it's hosting movie screenings. Next. This is one of my favorite pictures that has come out of the project. So one batch of our wheat paste was way too thin, and after we hung the signs and it rained, the posters just all fell down, and the wood boards were left, and people just started writing on the wood boards, and it turned into like a in-person message board for the lot. At the top, they said, "Hey, I called HBD 3 years ago. They said they were putting a building here. Where's the building?" Next, please. But my favorite was, "How about a goat yard?" Not even a question mark. How about a goat yard? Next. So we have also moved the software and kind of the concept into other cities. This is Philadelphia, grounded in Philly.org. Very similar site. Philly has a lot more vacant land, you might see. It's about 40,000 lots. I don't know the acreage off the top of my head. Next again. Philly was an interesting situation where they had a lot of data, and they have their own data portal, which has since been upgraded. But so there's property parcels. Next, please. They also have parcels that the water department came up with, which do not match the property parcels that Department of Finance uses. And next again. And then, because that wasn't enough, the Planning Commission made up their own parcels and sub-parcels when they made this land use database. So it was just a fun, situation where we had to try to come up with authoritative parcels and figure out whether they were vacant or not. This land use database turned out to be really useful, but it was just determining if it was actually the full parcel or which parcel it was related to. It's kind of an ongoing problem. Next, please. But on the plus side, this is pretty ugly, I know, but Philly has an API through which you can find both violations and licenses on land. Violations, you might get a fine for having trash on your vacant lot. We'll see that come through, and we'll say, oh, it's probably vacant if they have trash on their vacant lot. You have to license your vacant land there. It's like $50 in a form or something like that. But still, we see that license come through, and we say, oh, that's vacant. Maybe they can work out something with somebody, make it not vacant. They don't have to pay that anymore. They'll stop getting fined for trash. And the community around it will be able to have a project there. Next please. And otherwise it looks very similar. So every lot has its own page. You can subscribe to the lot. You can post notes. You can post pictures. Similar idea. Nice. With Philly, since there are a lot of reasons you might end up on the map, you being a vacant lot, we list those as far as we know them. So this one had violations. Also, the water department said it's around 75% permeable, so it's probably vacant. So with more data comes difficulties in presenting that data back to people in a way that is accessible. I think we're doing a pretty good job here. Probably could be improved too. Next. Similarly, we've done sites in New Orleans, next again, and in Los Angeles. Yes. So this is all built on a stack like this. They all have identical software configurations for the most part. So we start with Postgres and PostGIS, which are It's an open source database, Postgres, and Postgres is an open source extension to that. I believe Paul Ramsey's here. He's the founder of that project. He's going to be talking at lunch. Next, please. And on top of that, we use a web framework called Django, which has kind of its Postgres equivalent in GeoDjango. So GeoDjango knows how to talk to Postgres. Makes your life much easier as a programmer, talking about spatial things. And then on top of that, we have a framework that we've created called Living Lots. And this takes care of how you talk about parcels, how you talk about people who own those parcels, and then other things like subscribing to the parcels and adding nodes. Next again. And then on top of that, invariably there are things that need to be customized for each city. So on top of that, we have a thin layer that customizes the software for that city. Next, please. Was there another one? Yes. So follow along at GitHub/BOUT96acres if you're interested. Next again. And again, the site is 596acres.org. You can find the link to the slides here, or you can chat with me at lunch or after the session if you want to know more.